Following is an audio presentation of Journal of an Archangel, The Insurrection, read to you by its author, James Griffin. Written publisher, Publish America, Baltimore, Maryland. Copyright 2008. Spiritual disclaimer. Though the events that are being depicted in this publication are factual, the story itself is not. It's neither our intention nor purpose to mislead any of our readers or listeners into believing that Michael the Archangel has ever or will ever experience moments of weakness or doubt. To the contrary, the Holy Scriptures portray Michael as one of God's most valiant and heroic angels. The book of Daniel, chapter 10, verse 13, tells us that it was Michael that came to Gabriel's assistance when the enemy openly opposed him. In the book of Jude, verse 9, we are told that Michael contended with Satan over the body of Moses following his death. Then in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 7 through 9, it is foretold that God will one day use an angelic army that is under the direct authority of Michael to eject the devil and his minions from their lofty positions throughout the earth's atmosphere. All of these things are in stunning contrast to the very human adaptation of Michael that has been presented here. Yet despite the contradiction of Michael's character, this book still contains a number of spiritual truths. We have portrayed Michael as having both human emotions and weaknesses in an attempt to build a type of kinship between the reader and our central character, thereby presenting us with the opportunity to glean a degree of strength as we watch Michael face his many trials and tribulations. As you read or listen to this publication, keep in mind that despite the fact that this is a fictional account, it is still based on factual events. And though the Michael that is being presented here is a fictional character, there is still indeed a factual Michael that serves his Lord and his God with every fiber of his being. With all this being said, I would like to express my thankfulness for not only God's care and concern, but also for the watchfulness of all of his obedient spiritual forces. I know that God has used them to direct our paths, and I also know that as we, the descendants of Adam, walk in disobedience, the tasks that they perform are not always easy ones. Chapter 1. The Commission. The very concept of lack should be unheard of in heaven, but sadly, since the events that I'm about to depict to you have begun, there is one thing that I do lack, and that is free time. As an archangel that is in service to the Lord of hosts, our battle against the forces of evil has become an all-consuming endeavor. Therefore, it is a rare occasion that I have the opportunity to sit passively and write about my feelings, thoughts, and memories. But with the final battle fast approaching, God has not only given me the time that is necessary to place all these things in order, He has actually even asked me to compile an in-depth report that is based on them. To complete this endeavor, I have searched through log entries that I have maintained since the beginning of time. I then compiled several of these entries together, accompanied with personal commentary, in order to place this report into an easier-to-understand story style of format. My intention to provide a clear and precise account of not only the many events that have led up to this point, but also the way that these events have affected me personally. As per God's instructions, I have held nothing back in this memoir. As you read these words, you are not only studying factual events, you are also being invited into my innermost thoughts, as well as any hidden aspects of turmoil that perhaps even I have refused to acknowledge. To be totally honest with you, when I was first given this assignment, I felt it strange that one that is omnipotent or all-knowing would ask me to provide him with information. I mean, what could my report possibly say that he was not already aware of? God knows not only each and every event that has ever taken place, He's also familiar with the very thoughts that are in my mind. So I had to wonder what this assignment was really all about. Why would God ask me to research all these old journals if they serve no real purpose? Or a better question would have to be, why would God have instructed me to keep all these journals in the first place? The entire duty just didn't really seem to make any sense. Surely God would never ask me to provide Him with information that He already knew. As I thought about these things, the Spirit of the Lord came upon me and spoke Isaiah 9:6 from the eternal writings into my heart. This is a scripture that identifies our Lord as not only God, but also as counselor. And though I am well aware of all the sacred teachings, for some reason I failed to apply this aspect of knowledge to my current situation. With this being said, I now understood the report that I am working on is obviously not just a means of communicating information to God, but is instead a means of clearing up any problems or concerns that exists within my own mind. God knew that it was not him that needed to read my report. It was instead I that needed to write it. As I continued to remain still and listen to the voice of God, he also revealed to me that one day he will share my words with others that are experiencing similar times of turmoil and distress within their own lives. Be assured that if you are that person and God has permitted my words to fall into your hands, then he already knows the pain that you're experiencing, and he understands the confusion that seems to be engulfing your existence. I am convinced that as God has seen me through my time of turmoil, he will also see you through yours. Whatever you do, please remain strong and do not allow the enemy to manipulate your thoughts and feelings. I know how convincing he can be, but I also know the results of following his leadership. So remain focused and realize that you are not only battling for your own life and eternity, but also for those around you. It is often your influence that directs the paths of others. Whether you believe that or not, I have seen it firsthand, and sadly, I have seen this outside influence lead countless numbers of my friends and allies to a place of punishment that is beyond even angelic understanding. As I begin this task, I assure you that I will reach into my innermost feelings to recount to you the event that I have experienced. I will hold nothing back from you, and all that I ask in return is that you will heed my warnings, for I have lost enough of those that I care about, and I do not intend to lose you as well. Hang on, old friend, for the trumpet shall one day sound, and your confusion will cease to exist. In conclusion, I would like to express the fact that I consider it an honor to receive such a high calling from God. I offer him my eternal thanks and praise for not only his continual care, but also the concern that he has shown for all of his creation. Though I know that I have not always shown my thankfulness through my actions or my attitude, and for that I am eternally regretful. I have always known that it was God that sustained me. P.S. Lord, you have shown yourself to be not only my God and my King, but also a very dear friend. Your eternal servant, Michael. Chapter 2. The Celebration. When it comes to celebrations, there are none that compare to those that take place in the realm of heaven. But this gathering was far more than I'd ever experienced. God had just concluded his most recent creative project, and to commemorate the event, he'd recalled the entirety of the angelic host from their numerous assignments throughout the kingdom. It was as if this momentous occasion had been declared as a heavenly holiday, giving all of God's creation the opportunity to celebrate with their Creator. We were all there, from the greatest to the least, filled with a sense of longing and anticipation, just waiting to see what could generate all this excitement from our Lord. If the events that were about to unfold before our eyes could excite God as they had, then we could only imagine the thrill that it would bring to our limited existence. I'll never be able to forget that night. It seemed as though the very fibers of heaven were rippling with anticipation, almost as if they could sense that we were entering a new phase of our existence. I still can't put what I saw into words. It was just beyond my limited vocabulary, and truthfully, it far surpassed my understanding and even my imagination. Though heaven is indescribable by its very nature, there was just something different that day. It was as if the excitement that God was feeling on the inside was manifesting itself through the elements of heaven. As I took my place in the procession, entering into the presence of God, I was in awe by the appearance of what seemed to be a rainbow-colored dome that covered the vastness of this great gathering. Upon further investigation, I realized that this rainbow was merely the glory of God being reflected from the countless precious gems that made up the walls of heaven. The streets of gold were sparkling as though they were made of pure crystal, and as I entered the throne room, I was awestruck by its beauty. In all of heaven, there's no other place that even compares to this. In contrast, this room makes the streets of gold, the walls of pure gems, and the gates of pearl seem like nothing more than an elaborate construction site. The aroma that permeates the atmosphere is that of 1,000,000 rose gardens joined in unison, offering up their fragrance as a perfect and pleasing gift for the God that created them. It doesn't matter how many times I'm given the honor of visiting here, I can never seem to grasp the sheer depth of its beauty. After all, heaven begins and ends with the presence of God, so this location is like the starting point for all of glory. Everything else, though beautiful, gives us just an indication of where God has been, but the throne room is where his manifest presence remains. Upon entering the inner sanctum of God, I saw angels of all shapes, sizes, and ranks falling to their knees in praise and adoration. The normal military style of decorum, though important for the completion of tasks in heaven, is put aside here in the presence of God. The reason is simple. Duties and positions are of little importance to him that sits upon the throne. All that really matters is that they are there, and they are an aspect of his creation, which he greatly loves. Lucifer, the covering cherub, soon took center stage in order to lead the angels in worship. As we sang chorus after chorus, praising the God of all creation, we were very quickly caught up in his presence. Though to us our worship seemed to only encompass mere moments, I knew that the reality was that a great deal of time had actually elapsed before God finally proclaimed, "I will wait no longer." In excited tones like I'd never before heard, God began to share with us the purpose of this gathering. It turned out that God's most recent project, an entirely new world called Earth, and a multitude of creatures to serve as its population. And upon its completion, he wanted all of us to be there to share in his joy. With a mere brush of his hand, God opened a portal that allowed the angels to peer into another dimension. What we saw was unlike anything that we'd seen before. I'll never forget my first glimpse of the physical flora and fauna of God's latest world. It was so different from the realm of heaven, and though it was lacking in many areas, it was still beautiful just the same. God stood to his feet and proclaimed, "The time has come for my crowning achievement, and I shall now create a man to govern this new world, and his name shall be called Adam." The portal that God had just moments before opened began to expand until it literally became our new surroundings. It seemed as though God's new creation had devoured all of heaven, but the reality was that the portal had only enveloped us, transporting us to this new world. We found ourselves in the midst of creatures that were terrestrial by nature instead of celestial, and the environment was totally different than what we were accustomed to. We'd never before experienced elements such as those that this world had to offer. The feeling of a cool mist mixed with the heat of the sun shining overhead was overwhelming, and the sensation of an easterly breeze was exhilarating, but nothing was quite as shocking as what we saw next. There was an audible gasp that rippled through the angelic assembly as we saw the Lord bow to his knees in order to scoop dirt into a pile and form it into a shape upon the ground. I'm sure that I wasn't alone in my feeling of amazement as I saw our God taking such a submissive stance. After all, this was a position of humility that we as angels choose to utilize in order to demonstrate our reverence to God, but never before had we seen him take such a stance. Then, with a voice that caused all of creation to stand up and take notice, God proclaimed, "Let us make man in our image." God then knelt over the form that he had just made, and he took a deep breath that seemed to draw in every aspect of life. The very elements of this new world literally came to a standstill, and we all stood in a hushed silence, unable to breathe with anticipation over what we were seeing. This hands-on aspect of creation and all these emotions that were being displayed by God were beyond our comprehension. We were accustomed to seeing God creating with his spoken word, but actually making physical contact with the creation was beyond our understanding. Then the unthinkable happened. God touched his mouth to the mound of dirt that lay beneath him, and he exhaled with what seemed to be all of his creative ability being released in one earth-shattering blast. The repercussions of that moment so shook the foundation of this world that multitudes of angelic beings fell to the ground, unable to maintain their footing. Those few that didn't fall were still forced to turn their heads because of the flash of power and the brightness of the glory that was being released. As God rose to his feet, we saw what appeared to be movement coming from what just moments before had been a mound of dirt. The new creature sat up, looking at his creator, blinking at the brightness of the God that stood before him. God then took his new creature by the hand and helped him to rise to his feet. It was apparent that this new creature was created with physical limitations, placing it on a much lower plane of existence than we as angels enjoy. But there was still something very familiar and almost intimidating about the governor of this new world. I had heard God proclaim that man would be created in his image, but never before had I even imagined God as a physical being. I guess God's words explained the familiarity that I was feeling, but still, it just seemed so strange to look upon one that was weaker than I was, yet still see the image of God contained within it. With a movement of God's hand and a flash of light, the entirety of the assembly was once again joined together in the throne room of heaven. God then stood before us, informed all of us that I have a great deal to teach Adam before he can take his rightful position on the earth. So the need for us to fellowship with one another is essential at this early phase of his existence. God then reassured the assembly by telling them, I will always be accessible in that I am omnipresent. But for the time being, I am sure that you will understand that my manifest presence is required overseeing my latest creation. If any of you have a need and require my intervention, merely speak the word and I shall respond. The hour is still young, and I know that many of you have not seen each other for some time, so please let the festivities continue. With those words, God once again stepped through the portal and reappeared walking and talking with Adam on the other side. The portal then disappeared, and we were free to discuss and celebrate what we'd just seen. As angels with very busy schedules, many of us had not seen one another for a number of centuries. So just as God had recommended, we utilized this time together as not only a time of celebration, but also as a time to be reunited once again, experiencing both fellowship and renewal within our spirits. I was ecstatic to once again be in the company of my numerous friends and allies, especially Lucifer. I could still remember when we were younger and in training for our current positions. It seemed as if Lucifer and I were inseparable. If we were not studying or serving the temple, then we would more than likely be exploring the outer reaches of the kingdom. But odds were that whatever we were doing, we would probably be doing it together. We'd always been the best of friends, yet a great deal of time had elapsed since then. And honestly, I was really looking forward to seeing Lucifer again. It was then that I saw him approaching me. He was as elaborately dressed as ever, with precious stones covering his vesture, reflecting the glory of God in every direction. His stride was one of confidence and strength. His talent was unsurpassed, and his beauty rivaled anything in heaven, except perhaps God himself. As Lucifer stepped before me, I snapped to attention out of respect for not only the position that he held, but also for the angel that he was. I was proud to know him and even prouder to call him not only my supervisor, but also my friend. Our conversation started out innocently enough with routine small talk, but it soon escalated into a discussion that I never dreamed I would ever hear, especially from someone that I'd respected as much as I did Lucifer. Michael, he said, you and I have known one another for a number of years now, and you've always shown yourself to be extremely truthful. So I would like to ask you a question, and I expect a truthful answer. What else could I possibly give? There is, after all, only truth, I responded. That's what I like about you, Michael. You've always been a thinker, but trust me, I've recently discovered there's much more than truth, and perhaps one day we shall talk about it, and I will enlighten you. But for now, the truth will do. As Lucifer began to speak to me, he placed his arm around me in an almost condescending manner. I had no idea what was wrong, but I knew that there was something about his demeanor that seemed foreign to me. Lucifer and I have been friends for many years, really since the beginning, and I had never felt such discomfort around him before. I was just wondering, Lucifer asked, how content are you in regards to your current position? To be honest with you, Lucifer, I've never really thought about it before. Let me rephrase my question then. In light of all that you have seen today, have you ever stopped to consider how your duties will change now that God has placed an aspect of authority within this new earth-dwelling creation of his? Lucifer asked with a smirk. Things will be as God desires them to be. If my duties change, then so be it. Though I consider it an honor to be under your command, the reality is that when I serve you, I'm really serving God. So if for some reason God places authority within Adam, then I will serve him just as I do you. How can you be so ignorant, Michael? You and I are so beyond this earth dweller that it's not even funny, Lucifer said angrily. But keep in mind, Lucifer, that God is much more than we are. Therefore, if Adam is created in God's image and authority has been placed in Adam by God, then who are we to complain? You're not less than God, Michael. That's what this entire conversation is really all about. I can make us equal to God. This earth dweller will bow down and he will worship us. This is our destiny. You must come to the realization that God is attempting to hold us down because he is afraid of us, Michael. He is afraid of our true potential. For him to even attempt to place authority within this earth dweller is an insult to the realm of heaven. And I, for one, will no longer sit idly by and allow it to happen. Lucifer, the words that you're speaking, they're blasphemous to say the least. Why are you acting like this? I'll tell you why. Because I'm sick of getting the short end of the stick. Why should I use my talent and my ability to heap praises upon one that is so naive that he doesn't even recognize my right to receive worship? Look at me, Michael. You've honored me over the years. Now I command you, fall down on your knees and worship me. You know that I am worthy. Lucifer's eyes were like slits of fire. His entire being had been transformed to a level of arrogance that I had never before seen. In that moment, all the respect that I'd ever felt for Lucifer disappeared. I never dreamed that one that had been so beautiful was capable of becoming so ugly, and one that had been so intelligent could ever speak with such ignorance. But in that moment, I knew that was exactly what had happened. It seemed like it was only yesterday that God appointed Lucifer heaven's minister of worship, and I could still picture the look of excitement on his face. Yet what now stood before me was a very different angel than I had ever seen before. He had allowed pride to take root, and eventually took over. I snapped back to attention before Lucifer, and I requested permission to leave. He glared at me with such an intense look of hatred that I just knew he was going to stare a hole right through me. So I finally asked him, "Lucifer, do you really want to finish this conversation here?" Lucifer looked around at the multitude of angels that were all around us, and he replied, "You're right, Michael. Now is neither the time nor the place, but I assure you, we will eventually finish this." As I walked away from Lucifer, I stopped to face him for one last time, and I said, "I will remain obedient to you, but only because of the position of authority that God has given you. When that authority has been stripped, rest assured my loyalty will be gone as well. You will one day regret your decision, Michael, and it may just be sooner than you think. When there are regrets, Lucifer, I believe that yours will far outweigh mine." Lucifer then walked away from me, and he began talking to several other angels that had gathered for the celebration. I was sure that he was probably attempting to dissuade them just as he did me, and it truly sickened me to think about how many of my friends and allies would give heed to Lucifer simply because of who he was. I was confident that they wouldn't necessarily believe his words. Many would follow him because of the reputation that he held, the empty promises that he made, and the passion that he displayed as he spoke. But still I knew that if they followed him, they would be following him to their own demise. As the festivities continued, several angels were taking part in a praise and worship service, proclaiming the glory of God. I saw Lucifer take the platform and heap what appeared to be praise upon his Lord. But I now knew that for him it was all about the show. The words of praise that he spoke may have appeared to have been directed at God, but in reality he was only using his talents and abilities to attract more followers to himself, not to worship his God. As he sang, his voice had an almost hypnotic effect on all those in attendance, including me. I now knew of his impure motives, but there were still a number of times that I almost forgot that his praise wasn't genuine. I fought off his evil spells for the duration of the celebration, trying to keep my mind as clear as possible. I knew that no matter how bad I dreaded it, I would have to speak with the Lord in regards to my encounter with Lucifer. I couldn't allow my emotions to control my actions in this matter because this was just too important, and I knew that I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Chapter 3, Loss of Innocence. The only topics of conversation that are stirring any real interest these days are the numerous events that took place during the great celebration. I don't think that there was a member of the host that was not mesmerized by everything that they had seen and heard, and that includes me. To be totally honest with you, the events of that night have become permanently etched into my mind, almost to the point of where they've become more than just memories to me. Instead, they've become a part of who I am. I truly wish that my exposure had been limited to the things of God. After all, that was what the celebration was all about. But sadly, the altercation that I'd had with Lucifer tainted the entire experience for me. I'm not saying that I was unmoved by the miraculous events that I witnessed, but to be totally honest with you, I'm still undecided which had a greater impact on me. Was it the splendor of what I saw, or was it the reality of what that night has come to represent to me? I no longer see the celebration as just the beginning of a new world. It also marks the loss of my own innocence. Not that I had anything to do with the wicked events that took place behind the scenes, but it was the night that I first became aware of the existence of pride, discontentment, and ultimately evil. I wish that I would have been the only one that was permanently altered by the evil events of that night, but sadly I know that I'm not alone. I am confident that many of my friends and allies have also been affected, some in a positive manner, while others have been permanently and negatively changed. Since that night, I've heard numerous discussions about the power and creative ability of our God, the mystery of Adam, the beauty of the earth, and inevitably the sincerity of Lucifer's worship. This last topic of conversation sickened me, but I held my tongue. I know that there are many that are unaware of Lucifer's activities behind the scenes, but I have neither the desire nor the right to elaborate on their statements. I know that I can never cause division within the ranks of heaven by telling others what I know to be true. I'd heard that I was not the only one that Lucifer had approached with his complaints and feelings of discontentment that night. He had also spoken to several others in an attempt to sway them into his way of thinking. My biggest regret was the fact that I should have immediately reported the incident to the Lord as I had originally intended, but instead I decided to give Lucifer the benefit of the doubt. I was convinced that someone that had seemed so dedicated could never have fallen so far. I knew that the words that he had used had made him guilty of blasphemy, but I still held on to the hope that he would come to his senses. I was sure that if Lucifer would only repent for what he had done, his dedication would be restored, as would our friendship, and then I could once again serve under him with the same loyalty that I'd always known. Yet with the passing of time, things seemed to grow much worse. I had attempted to speak with my old friend on several occasions, but he just slammed the door in my face. And now, from what I'm hearing, it seems that Lucifer is becoming quite bold in his outreach for followers, almost to the point of carelessness. It sounds as though the evil within Lucifer's heart has totally taken over, but even more disturbing is the fact that his words seem to be stirring up a great deal of confusion within the emotions of those that listen to him, especially in the absence of the manifest presence of the Lord. This fact in itself seems to be working in Lucifer's favor, because the omnipresence of God is something that is beyond our understanding. We all know that in God's omnipresent state, he is in all places at all times, and he is aware of everything that is taking place. The primary problem, however, is that we, his creation, are not always consciously aware of his presence. So many times we feel as though we are alone, when in reality he is very near to us. This was the fact that bothered me so badly. I just couldn't understand why God was allowing Lucifer to continue to spread his propaganda. Surely God was aware of all that was transpiring here, yet there was still no call to action from the throne. I know that as an archangel, one of my duties is to stand against just such activity. What can I possibly do when my opposition is none other than the minister of worship? Not only is Lucifer my superior, he is also a highly respected platform minister that has always flowed in the anointing of God. So if there's any intervention to be done in this situation, I know that it has to come from God himself. After all, I've already done all that I can to get through to Lucifer. I've even tried to appeal to our friendship, yet his animosity only seems to grow worse. It was as though his lust for power had blinded him to his sin, and he is refusing to heed the numerous warnings that I am offering. With this in mind, I knew that the time had come. I had to speak with the Lord in regards to my fallen friend before it was too late, not only for him, but for the rest of us as well. As I sat there in my office feeling frustrated and confused, I called out to God with all that was in me. It was then that I felt an urgency to report to the throne room. I instantly heeded this call and left my office en route to my meeting with the Most High. When I initially left for my meeting, my confidence level was strong, and I was sure that I had heard from the Lord. But the closer that I got to the throne room, the less confident I felt. Did I indeed hear from God, or was that feeling of urgency merely my own desperation calling back to me? As I approached the entrance, I was greeted with the sound of praise and worship, so it appeared as though God's manifest presence was back, at least for the time being. I stopped in the outer court, enjoying what I was hearing, when my thoughts began to wander. I reflected on the position that I'd been granted as an archangel and the free access that I had been given to all of God's creation. I knew that my many journeys had given me stories and excitement beyond many of my contemporaries' dreams, and I recognized that this position was one of privilege and prestige. Yet as I entered the throne room, my thoughts quickly changed. I looked upon the seraphim, who are not only permitted access to the throne room, but are also permitted to remain there on a permanent basis. I then dreamed of the day when my missions would come to a close, and I, like the seraphim, would know this chamber, not only as a sanctuary, but instead as a home. As these thoughts plagued my mind, I began to feel a cramp deep within my stomach. The pain was unlike anything that I had ever felt before. I soon found myself on the ground in absolute agony, What was this weakness that I was experiencing? And why was pain enveloping my body? I knew that God's holiness caused a surge of power to move throughout the throne room like the waves upon the sea, but never before had it caused me pain. It was then that I realized that my thoughts had turned into feelings of envy, and since no sin can stand in the presence of God, I was quickly driven to my knees by His holiness. Why had I embraced such concepts in my mind? I am here to speak to the Lord about a possible rebellion that is underway, and now I display a rebel's heart right here in front of Him. This power of holiness is beyond my strength and might, but as I crumpled to the ground, God extended His right hand in my direction, and the strength quickly returned to my body. As I looked toward the throne, I saw God smiling that knowing smile as He said, "My grace is sufficient for you, Michael." You have to understand that losing strength is not a common occurrence to an angel. This was the first time that I'd ever felt literally forced to my knees due to physical weakness. Therefore, it took me a few moments to recover from the experience. As I stood and flexed my muscles, allowing the power that God had given me to once again fill my body, I realized what a humbling experience I had just gone through. It was then that God addressed me a second time by saying, "Your accomplishments and your position are not based on your own power or by the might of your hand. You already know this to be true, Michael. Instead, they are gifts from my spirit." I offered up what I knew to be a feeble thank you to God for His assistance, but I just couldn't seem to find the words that would adequately display my true feelings. The apprehension that I had in regards to approaching the throne would probably sound confusing to many of you, as a great number of people have the misconception that angels interact with God so much that our encounters with Him become nothing more than routine. But the reality is that God is so awe-inspiring that we never become complacent towards Him. Like every moment in His presence is a moment of eternity that can never be encountered a second time, and each moment that we're apart from Him is an eternity that's forever lost. To be with God is to be fresh and new all over again. Though I've been alive for centuries, the reality is that compared to our eternal God, I am but an infant child. All of my wisdom, strength, and ingenuity are little more than a fleeting thought when I am with one that is so much more than I am. With a grin that warmed my entire being, God said, "Come boldly unto my throne of grace." So with God's grace and strength, I stood to my feet and moved toward Him, slowly at first, but then in a full-fledged run. I had to get there. This was the place where all of God's creation is supposed to be. As I arrived, I instantly fell to my knees with tears flooding my eyes, and at once I began giving Him all the praise and worship that I could muster. I remember crying out with the seraphim, shouting, "Holy, holy is our God." My worship was neither orchestrated nor was it prompted. It was based solely on what I was seeing and how I was feeling at that moment. My worship was one of response, not duty. The more that I took part in the worship service that day, the more that I knew that this was why I'd been created. Everything else just seemed to be a momentary hindrance in comparison. It was then that the Lord reached His hand down and ever so gently wiped away all of my tears. He asked, "Michael, what is it that's troubling you so greatly? I can feel your pain, and I know the inner turmoil that you're now experiencing." My reply was given with a great deal of discomfort. I said, "Lord, I would give anything to not be speaking the words that I'm about to say." "Then don't," God interrupted. "But as a faithful servant and a friend, I must." "Michael, when I told you not to speak the words, do you think I was telling you that I didn't want to know the information that you wish to share? I already know what you want to speak with me about. I know of the rumors of insurrection brought on by the dissatisfaction of Lucifer and his minions. I already know that you yourself have been approached in an attempt to dissuade you from your duties, but I also know that you have remained faithful." As the Lord spoke these words to me, the tears began flowing again, but this time not in response to His holiness. Instead, it was due to the pain that I knew that He had to have been feeling. The Lord continued when He said, "Iniquity has been found within my creation, but all is not lost, Michael. I knew that this was going to take place before I ever laid the foundation of the world. As I sat in the nothingness of eternity, I saw every event that has ever and will ever take place. When I just contemplating forming all that I have made, I already felt the sting of rejection that I now know through this rebellion. As I peered through the fiber of time, I saw the price that would one day have to be paid because of Lucifer's fall. But then, as I thought, I considered my alternative. I saw an eternity without you and all of those that are faithful to me. And then I sighed and began my work. With a wink of the eye, God said, because my creation was worth the price. As the Lord shared these feelings and memories with me, he had this expression almost as though he was looking forward in time once again. And then he said, yes, Michael, I knew, therefore I've already made provision. He then wiped the tears from my eyes a second time and embraced me as a father would his son. As I exited the throne room, I ran right into the anointed cherub himself. He smiled that wicked little smile that Lucifer was quickly becoming known for and informed me, I will need a detailed report from you in regards to the conversation that just took place between you and the Lord, Archangel. I instantly stopped and looked directly into those coal black eyes and saw an emptiness that I had never before seen. He still wore the robes of his office, but he was very different than I had ever seen him before. It was almost as though someone had turned him upside down and poured out his soul. That conversation was between me and the Lord, cherub, and I don't see how it would be any of your concern. Lucifer wasn't accustomed to being opposed, so I shouldn't have been surprised when he responded with such an intense anger. I'm making it my business, he said. From this point on, we will use proper chain of command. I'm putting an end to this infernal open door policy of heaven. Its very concept is ridiculous. The Lord doesn't have time to tolerate your incessant babbling. See to it that it doesn't happen again. Lucifer turned and began walking away from me, but he suddenly stopped and faced back in my direction and said, that's covering cherub to you, Michael, and don't ever forget that. I tried not to respond, but I just couldn't help myself. I knew that what Lucifer was doing was wrong, so with as much courage as I could muster, I informed Lucifer, the only thing that I won't forget is the reality that you're only concerned with covering your own backside because you've long ago forsaken your duties in the throne room. The cherub stormed back over to me and got right in my face. You're so smug, aren't you? You just think that you have it all figured out, don't you? Well, allow me to tell you something. I've been playing you like a flute. Do you remember that feeling of envy that overcame you while you were in the throne room? Well, those thoughts were planted in your mind by me. You have no idea of what you're up against. Don't think that I will forget this insubordination when I exalt myself to the throne. I will remember those that stood with me, and I will also remember those that opposed me. All I can say is, woe unto those that stand against me, especially subordinates such as yourself. With that, I turned and exited the outer courts, leaving Lucifer and his inflated ego behind. The Lord had assured me that he'd already taken care of the problem. As a matter of fact, it was solved even before the problem existed. So all that I can do for now is carry on my normal duties and wait upon the Lord to resolve the situation. Chapter 4. The Fall of a Friend. As time passed, Lucifer's words transformed from the idle chatter of an angry angel to the point where it was starting to sound more like the beginnings of an organized movement. The sheer numbers of my many allies that were giving heed to these ridiculous ramblings of Lucifer amazed me. I know that he's a very charismatic leader. To be totally honest, I at one time had a great deal of respect for him myself, but that was before his talk of rebellion. He's now only a shell of the angel that he once was. Though he still wears his priestly garments, his nobility is a thing of the past. His anointing has become stripped, and all that remains is his anti-God rhetoric. I have become increasingly sick of hearing his propaganda, so I can only imagine how all this is making God feel. The patience that the Lord has displayed in regards to all of this is so beyond not only my ability but also my comprehension. He had remained silent despite the many accusations and words of condemnation that have been thrown in his direction. But still, I know that his silence will eventually come to an end. These rebels can only push the Lord so far or try his patience for so long before he finally pushes back and puts an end to all of this foolishness. Even now, you can feel a dramatic change coming in the atmosphere. The Luciferian forces, as they're now being called, have grown in both momentum and arrogance. Though I know that God has something planned, it just seems as though the enemy's efforts to obtain dominion over heaven are increasing, and so is God's passivity towards them. To be totally honest, I'm becoming very concerned that God has become overly distracted by his new creation, but I must keep my mind focused so not to give heed to Lucifer's influence. I know that despite my concerns, it's neither my duty nor within my range of ability to second-guess God. Therefore, I shall wait upon the Lord for a resolution to this conflict, and my trust shall forever be in him. As I completed the last line of my journal entry, a large, menacing-looking angel entered my study. He was dressed in glimmering white from head to toe, with a solid gold sash around his waist that was holding an immense golden sheath and sword. I immediately sprang from my desk and bolted to the entryway of my study in order to face my visitor. We then grabbed one another and embraced. "Baal, old friend, it has been so long since I've seen you." "Likewise, Michael, it has been far too long. What were you working on when I came in?" Baal asked. "Oh, nothing really. The Lord has asked me to keep a journal for some reason," I responded. "A journal?" Baal said inquisitively. "For an all-knowing God?" "That's precisely what Lucifer is talking about. It seems that a great deal of our duties recently have been no more than distractions. We've become glorified errand boys, lacking any real sense of purpose, and I, for one, have gotten sick of it." "Baal, what are you talking about? Please don't tell me that you've begun following that charlatan Lucifer. He's not concerned about you or anyone else. His only focus is what he can get for himself, in direct contrast to the care and concern that the Lord has always given us. So how can you embrace all of this garbage?" "Michael, my friend, you're the one that's following a charlatan. The Lord has kept us from rising to our fullest potential. He has made us to be messengers, while Lucifer will make us gods. He has made us to serve, while Lucifer will see to it that we are the ones that shall be served." It was then that I noticed the shallowness of Baal's eyes. It was that same emptiness that I had seen during my confrontation with Lucifer. Suddenly, in one flash of motion, Baal drew his sword from his sheath and brandished it in my direction. He said, "Look at this, Michael. Even the Lord knows that war is imminent. Why else would he provide us with swords if not to fight?" As he spoke, Baal raised his sword high in the air, and the blade ignited in solid flames. "This is one sword that may have been issued for the security or covering of God, but it will be used instead to overthrow him." As Baal continued his ravings, I moved with all the speed that I could muster, and in just the twinkling of an eye, my sword was drawn. With one powerful sweeping motion, I knocked Baal's sword to the side, and then laid my own blade to his throat. As long as there are swords lifted in defiance to my Lord, rest assured there will also be swords lifted in his defense. This, my friend Baal, will be the group that you shall find me with. But until we meet on that battlefield in the Lord's timing, may I suggest that you leave before the battle starts early. I am not as patient as the Lord is. I then removed my blade from Baal's throat, but instead of resheathing it, I kept it in my hand just in case. Baal took several steps away from me and said, "You're a fool, Michael. Your God has forsaken us in his meaningless courtship with these earth dwellers. Don't throw your destiny away for him. If he's too blind to recognize our superiority over these gnats that he calls humans, then is he really worthy of our praise?" I eased my sword to my side, and with as much compassion and concern as I have ever felt, I asked my old friend, "When was the last time that you got in his presence, Baal? I'm convinced that if you would just go and talk with him, then your opinion and attitude would change immensely." "Better question is," Baal responded, "when was the last time that he was here? How can I get into his presence when he's always somewhere else?" "But Baal, God is omnipresent. He's in all places at all times. So yes, he's on earth, but he's also in heaven. You know that." "He may be here," Baal replied, "but his thoughts and heart are with his precious Adam." As Baal spoke, I moved closer to him out of a feeling of concern. After all, Baal had been a close friend for many years, so how could I just watch him suffer without responding? As I placed my right hand on Baal's shoulder to offer him comfort, he drew a small dagger from beneath his cloak and thrust it toward my head. But just as Baal attacked, an unseen hand slapped the dagger from his grip. My old friend began to crumple as a horrible pain reverberated through his entire body, and in just an instant of time, he lost all of his strength till he finally collapsed to the ground. I then stood over Baal and said, "I told you that God is in all places at all times." Baal lay upon the floor cursing and writhing in pain, but once I'd finally had enough of it, I commanded Baal to leave in the name of our Lord. Baal crawled from the area on his belly, much the same as what we now know as the motions of a cursed earthly snake. As Baal was exiting my study, the angel Gabriel walked in. Upon his entrance, Gabriel never even glanced in my direction. He was too busy glaring at Baal with a look of total disdain. You could see from Gabriel's expression that he was totally shocked at the words and sounds that were coming from Baal's mouth. Gabriel had never heard anything quite as ugly or pathetically disgusting as the sounds that were now entering his ears. The distortion of Baal's physical appearance caused him to look hideously evil. As I watched, I witnessed the luster and beauty of this angelic being replaced by the tortured appearance of one that had become totally consumed with anger. As Baal disappeared from our sight, Gabriel turned to face me with an inquisitive expression on his face and asked, "What in heaven was all that about?" "Don't play dumb with me, Gabriel. You know exactly what's going on here. This is but the first of many battles that will soon take place. I'm sure that you've already declared your loyalty to one side or the other. So now I ask you, which side did you choose?" I guess that I could try to make the excuse that I was under a great deal of pressure at the time, but I still know that it was wrong for me to verbally lash out at Gabriel the way that I did, especially in light of the fact that I didn't yet know which side he was on. As Gabriel looked me up one side and down the other, his eyes caught sight of the sword that was still in my hand, so he hesitantly laughed as he asked, "Surely these battles that you speak of will not see the two of us as adversaries, old friend." "If it does, Gabriel, then so be it." I now know that my response was both cold and confrontational, but at that moment I wasn't sure whom I could trust. With one mighty swoop of motion, Gabriel had his gun sheathed and uplifted. He cried out, "Behold the sword of the Lord!" Then he launched himself in my direction. I responded by lunging at him with my weapon raised, and as we met in the center of the room, the sparks flew like lightning. Just imagine two unstoppable objects colliding into one another, and then you will have an adequate concept of the scene as it existed. Gabriel may be slightly smaller than I am in stature, but he is still my equal in every conceivable way. As we locked onto one another, I felt his vice-like grip clutching at the hand that held my sword. I likewise attempted to gain control of his weapon. As we grappled in the floor, I finally caught a glimpse of Gabriel's eyes, and my blood suddenly ran cold. For within his eyes, there was a very familiar sparkle that I had not previously noticed. I had dealt enough with Lucifer's forces by this time that I knew that Gabriel was not one of them. This meant that I was in a life or death struggle with an ally and a friend. The rebels of heaven had lost their sparkle in their eyes and only possessed a dull, flat stare in its place. I instantly released my grip on Gabriel and then dropped my sword to the ground. "Gabriel, have mercy on me and relinquish me, my brother, for we are not enemies," I cried. As Gabriel loosed his grip, he peered deeply into my eyes and then suddenly embraced me to himself. "Michael, I just knew that they'd gotten to you before I did. I came in here and saw Baal behaving as he was. Then you confronted me with such open hostility and apparent anger. Why did you react to me so harshly?" "To be totally honest with you, Gabriel, I just don't know who I can trust anymore. I've begun to see everyone as an enemy, and trust and friendship has become something that is earned instead of given." Listen to yourself, Michael. Whose philosophy are you quoting? Would you ever hear the Lord make that statement that you just made? Or is that more likely to come from the mouth of Lucifer? Do you really think that heaven is supposed to be this way? Or is this just the way that Lucifer's rebellion has made it to appear? You need to regain a clearer picture of who you serve. Then place your trust wholly and completely in Him. Only by doing this will you ever see your frustration dissipate, your confusion vanish, and Lucifer's deception be vanquished once and for all from your mind. I know that what you're saying is true, Gabriel, and for the most part, I do trust in God, but I just don't fully understand everything that is taking place all around me. Longtime friends have become enemies. I'm forced to serve under an adversary to my Lord, and for all that I know, I may very well be unwittingly aiding in the rebellion by fulfilling my normal daily duties. Why has God not ended this and set things back in order? Why has Lucifer not been removed from his current position, and how much longer until he is? God's ways are not our ways, Michael. What is transparent to him is unforeseeable to us. God has a plan, and his timing is always right. It may not make sense to us right now, but the reality is that God is long-suffering. He will tolerate Lucifer and his sin as long as is necessary. God's will is that all of his creation will remain faithful, but he will never force us to be. If he were to place an end to this rebellion before its time, then many would never be able to decide for themselves who they wish to serve. All things must be fulfilled, Michael, and then Lucifer shall know the penalty for what he has done. I fell to my knees with tears in my eyes and cried out to God, why do I not see things as clearly? Why is there so much confusion in my mind while things are so clear to my brother Gabriel? Gabriel then placed his right hand on my shoulder and sympathetically confided, Michael, I know these things because I'm fulfilling my duties as a messenger, and this has all been a message to you from the Lord. He has instructed me to tell you all that I have, and also to let you know that Lucifer has desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. This is why you are suffering so greatly. The Lord in his infinite wisdom has sent me to aid you in your fight. And old friend, I shall not fail you. I stood to my feet, threw my shoulders back, and flexed my body back into shape. If Lucifer wants me, then he shall have me. But unfortunately for him, I shall not be alone. I shall be accompanied by both the Spirit of God and one of God's mightiest angels, my brother in arms, Gabriel. Chapter 5. The Assignment. A great deal of time had elapsed since I'd last spoken with Lucifer, so it seems that he is as content as I am in allowing a span of distance to settle between us. But for the life of me, I can't understand why. Not that I'm complaining, mind you, especially since the last very unpleasant encounter, but this reasoning just seems to escape me. I mean, up to this point, the Lord has not taken any action against him, so by all rights, he's still in a position of authority over me, yet for some reason, he's not flaunting it. I wish that I could gain some insight into his thoughts, but for now, they are as unknown to me as is his next move. The very thought of my beloved leader and his newfound belief structure has become an overwhelming episode of mass confusion. If I don't clear my mind of all this garbage soon, it seems as if the madness will totally consume me. Please don't misunderstand my words, for I am confident in God's protection, and I am well aware that he has the matter well in hand. But I am still extremely leery of the unknown that seems to be looming in my future. After all, Gabriel had said that I had been named as a special target by Lucifer, so why is he not taking full advantage of the authority that he currently has over me? When it seemed that my paranoia was reaching a fevered pitch, I was brought back to the reality of the moment by an abrupt knock on my office door. As I opened it to my dismay, I was greeted by the smiling face of none other than my recently absent supervisor, covering cherub, Lucifer himself. Good morning, Michael. How are you on this beautiful day? I'm doing just fine, Lucifer. Would you like to come in? I asked reluctantly. Yes, Michael. I need to speak with you, and it's of the utmost importance. As I once again took a seat behind my desk, I motioned for Lucifer to have a seat directly across from me. What can I help you with? Actually, Michael, I believe that it is I that can help you. You see, I have been doing a great deal of thinking as of late, and I'm afraid that I have become guilty of a few things that perhaps place me in need of repentance. Therefore, I need you to forgive me, Michael, for the turmoil that I have caused you. I now know that my words were nothing more than outward manifestations of pride and arrogance. I found myself lashing out at all those that cared for me, and for that I am sorry. Lucifer, I've longed to hear you speak those words. I've been so concerned about you, old friend, but I knew that you'd see the error of your ways. Let's pray together and praise the Lord as we used to. I have, Michael. Trust me, I have. And no, I would love to join you in corporate worship right now. I must be on my way. I'm afraid that I have a great deal of damage control to tend to since my recent discrepancies. He stood to his feet and began to walk towards the door, but just as he began to exit the room, he stopped and asked if he could count on my loyalty. Once I gave him my assurance, he then informed me of my next assignment. Michael, I need you to report to the earth and monitor the activities of that new land dweller. You mean Adam? But why? Surely if you've learned anything from my recent shortcomings, you must have come to the conclusion that no one is beyond reproach, and that includes God's precious little Adam. God is in close proximity to Adam, and he would never allow him to fall. When it comes to his creation, God can be slightly naive, Michael. I mean, I've yet to receive a reprimand from him, even after you filed your little report with him. And as speaking of close proximity to God, remember that I am the minister of worship. So don't think that Adam is untouchable, because I assure you that he is definitely touchable. Something about his last statement made me cringe, but I had no idea why. After all, who was I to doubt the sincerity of Lucifer's repentance? And if he is sincere, then there's nothing else for me to be concerned about. Yet for some reason, my confusion persisted. My old friend had spoken the words that I'd longed to hear, but for some reason, my spirit was still uneasy. It bothered me that I could sense animosity cloaked within his words. And what was this new assignment that he spoke of? Why would Lucifer be so interested in the activities of Adam, especially knowing that God is already with him most of the time? I had to wonder if Lucifer was really concerned about what Adam was doing, or was he just hoping to keep tabs on God through my assignment? The very thought of being Lucifer's lookout as he continued his sinful activities sickened me. But I know that if I refuse to follow his instructions, then it is I that have become rebellious. So what can I do? Moments ago, it seemed as if all of my worries had come to an end, but now they're exploding within my mind, throwing me into a type of turmoil that was even worse than before. Prior to this conversation, all that I had to do was sit and wait, but now I'm forced to make a decision, one way or the other, and the decision seems to be beyond my grasp. What if Lucifer is seriously concerned about God? I mean, though I don't agree with his implication about God having shortcomings, I still understand many of his statements. Why had God not taken any action during the rebellion? And why had he allowed so much pain and confusion when all that he really had to do was speak the word, and it would have all come to an abrupt end? If I could only find answers to these questions, then I'd know what to do. But since I'm currently unable to, then I must resign myself to simply walk in obedience and wait on God for the fulfillment of all things. Chapter 6, Watching in the Garden. As soon as I had written the last line in my journal, I set out for Earth to fulfill my latest assignment. Upon my arrival, I took in a deep breath and once again enjoyed the sensation of being on this new physical world. To be totally honest, there was nothing more that I wanted than to just sit there and allow the cobwebs to clear from my mind. But I knew that my assignment had to take priority over my own personal desires, so I continued on my journey. As I approached the outskirts of Eden, I took up a position hidden within the shrubbery of a small field, where I could easily observe both God and Adam as they walked and talked together. As I watched the interaction that they shared with one another, I was in awe. God's love for Adam was apparent to all that saw them together. It was as if the creation of Adam had fulfilled an inner longing that had always remained incomplete in the heart of God. I'm not trying to imply that his relationship with the angels ever lacked the same type of intensity. I'm just saying that it was different. As I remained hidden, my breathing became labored. I knew in my heart that what I was doing was wrong, yet I also knew that if I refused to fulfill my obligations, I could be equally as wrong. I kept hearing Lucifer's words of repentance echoing within my mind, but then I would hear the small comments of slander hidden within his apologies. I just couldn't figure out how to feel about everything that was happening to me. I'd considered calling out to God, but what if Lucifer was right and God did need our protection? Would he ever accept it knowingly, or would he reject it as an unnecessary precaution? As I thought about all these things, I heard the Lord approaching me, and out of ignorance I tried to hide from his presence. As I cowered there in the tall grass, I heard God's steps stop just behind me. Michael, did you really think that I wouldn't know you were here? As I looked toward him, I saw the familiar loving expression, and then he gave me that knowing little wink. Michael, my boy, you have questions that you've struggled with for far too long, but before I answer any of your questions, I want to ask you one. Why have you allowed yourself to be so tormented when all you really ever had to do was ask me? Lord, I wanted to call out to you, but truthfully I was beginning to feel like a weak link in the chain of heaven. It seems that all I ever do anymore is doubt and complain, when in reality I'm supposed to be a leader in the assembly. Besides, you already know everything that's going on, so by coming back to you again, wouldn't I have only reinforced the reality that for some reason my faith is beginning to lack? The only thing about your faith that bothers me, Michael, is the fact that one of my top angels didn't feel comfortable enough to come to me with his concerns. Have we been together so long and you still don't know me? Have I ever made you to feel judged or forsaken? Or have I ever given you the idea that I am unapproachable? I am well aware that you are in the midst of a spiritual battle, unlike anything that you have ever even imagined before. But I will see you through this if you will only allow me to. I've never doubted your protection, Lord, but knowledge does not always ease pain. I am surviving day by day with a number of decisions that will affect not only me, but also those around me. And truthfully, I don't always know what to do. I'm not like you, Lord. I don't always have the right answer. But in many ways, Michael, you're more like me than you are willing to admit, at least in regards to your knowledge of the truth. There's an understanding that dwells deep within you, but the only problem is that you must learn to trust in it. This truth was implanted there by me at the time of your creation. And though it feels as though it has been long forgotten, the reality is that it has only become buried by your own personal fears and the lies that have been spoken to you by others. You, Michael, are a leader in the assembly. Don't ever forget that. But right now, you're going through a period of growth that will one day provide you with the boldness that will enable you to be the leader that I have called you to be. But why, Lord? Why can you not just remove all these obstacles that are in my life and grant me maturity and boldness through your grace instead of through my trials? Is all this really necessary? I'm sorry if this sounds disrespectful, Lord, but I just don't understand. If it is within your ability to end confusion, turmoil, and suffering for your creation, then why do you choose not to? Things are not always as simple as you make them sound, Michael. It is my will that no one should suffer, and that all of my creation should experience a blessed and abundant life. But sadly, due to the activities that have been put in motion through Lucifer's rebellion, my will is not the only force that is at work here. When Lucifer chose to walk away from me and then persuaded others to follow him, their wills became an active force in this world. They have no comprehension for the snowball effect that they have placed into motion through their sin. No, I would love to tell you that this mess is coming to a close. Sadly, that would not be the truth. To the contrary, things are going to grow much worse before they ever get better. Lord, I'd never say anything to hurt you. The last statement implies that Lucifer's right when he says that your power is limited by the choices of your creation. My assignment here is to protect you from any insurrection that could possibly be perpetrated by Adam or the animals of this world. The covering cherub is concerned that you could possibly suffer at the hands of your creation, and he has sent me here to stop it. The covering cherub has spoken desires that are hidden within his own heart, and by doing so, he has revealed his future plans. But back to your concerns, Michael. I will admit that to a certain extent, my power is limited. It's only limited by my love for you and not by the choices that you make. I love all of my creation with a passion that is unsurpassed by any other emotion within the kingdom. But the reality is that when you give true love, you expect true love in return. If I removed every obstacle that my children would ever face, then would they love me because of who I was? Or would they love me simply because of what I could do for them? If I instantly judged every sin as it were being committed, would my creation love me because they wanted to, or would it be because they were scared not to? So you're right, Michael. It's within my scope of power to end all of the confusion and all of the pain of my creation. But by doing so, I would also end the relationship that we share. Just as Lucifer lived, never feeling any of the negative aspects of life, I could encamp around my children, and they would know the same type of existence, but eventually they would also experience the same type of resentment and rebellion. I would become a tool, a simple means to an end, instead of a parental figure to my children. This is why you've heard me say, it's not by power nor by might, but by my spirit. It's not a question of my ability to change a situation. Instead, I choose to allow situations to occur so that I may go through them with my children by the indwelling of my spirit. What do you mean by indwelling? That conversation, young Michael, is for another time and another place. Suffice it to say, all of your experiences will be my experiences. Your pain will be my pain. And despite the turmoil that you feel, I am but a breath away. As God spoke those words to me, his spirit called from deep within my soul and revealed to me that all things would not be understood until all things had been accomplished. He then began walking back toward the field until he and Adam disappeared from my sight, walking and talking together once again. At that very moment, Lucifer stepped out from his hiding place behind me with a very disgruntled expression. Michael, you weren't supposed to have allowed yourself to be seen on this assignment. I thought you understood that. How could I have possibly hid myself from the knowledge of God? I mean, I know that I could have gone unnoticed by Adam, but surely you knew that God would know that I was here. He didn't acknowledge my presence, did he? With a wave of his hand, Lucifer informed me that he didn't want to hear anything further that I had to say on the subject. I just came to see how you were doing on your assignment. I didn't come here to debate theology with you. This assignment has apparently been compromised, therefore it has come to its conclusion. I was preparing to meet with His Eminence Baal. However, with your failure comes complications that must be dealt with. Please deliver this message to Baal with my apologies, then return to your home and await further instructions from me. Lucifer, I really meant no harm. Your intentions don't change the outcome. Now please, do as you have been instructed, and do not fail me a second time. With those words, I departed from the earth to once again find myself isolated and alone with my thoughts. God's words had brought me such comfort, yet as his words ceased to echo in the chambers of my mind, the doubts came flooding back. Why did God not notice that Lucifer was there? Why had God left me so abruptly? And why was Lucifer so angry about my conversation with God? Were we not all on the same side with the same agendas? Or was Lucifer still up to his old tricks as I had originally suspected? I could no longer sit idly by acting as though everything was okay. As a leader in the assembly, I had a responsibility to investigate all threats to the kingdom, and I had to know the truth about Lucifer once and for all. Chapter 6. Call to Arms. Though God is able to move between dimensions in mere moments, the same journey for an angel is quite extensive. I'd hoped that the trip from earth to heaven would at least give me the opportunity to clear my mind, but sadly enough, when I arrived, I was still just as confused as I'd ever been. I'm not trying to imply that I would ever join Lucifer or his band of wannabes, but it seems as though the actions that I take are not as easily determined as my intentions. I mean, here I am, with a package directly from the hands of Lucifer himself that may very well contain many of the answers that I'm seeking. But what I should do with it is still a mystery. I've tried to justify reading the letter, but since God already knows everything, I'm sure that he's already aware of the information that this infernal correspondence contains. So if God already knows the information, what point would me reading it really serve? The easiest thing would be to just deliver the package, thereby removing the temptation. Yet I also know that if I allow this letter to pass from my hand without looking at it, then the confusion that I'm feeling will persist. I could feel the Spirit of God leading me away from the temptation, but there was still a nagging insistence that dwelt deep within me that wanted to know the truth, and this letter could contain the answers that I so desperately needed. With that thought, I finally gave in to my inner desire and tore open the package and began reading Lucifer's message to Baal. To my esteemed colleague, Baal, I agree that lurking in the shadows was the furthest thing from our original intentions, but sometimes in order to achieve our goals, we must do those things that we would rather avoid. However, it is my pleasure to let you know that your patience has persevered. At this point, a third of heaven's forces have pledged their allegiance to me, and I am of the opinion that when we begin our assault, many of these so-called loyalists will quickly defect. The very sight of their brethren brandishing swords in their direction will cause multitudes to lay down their arms, giving us free access not only to the earth, but also to the throne. Therefore, the time has come for me to rally our forces and begin our campaign for dominion. Our assault will begin on the realm of earth, where we will march against God's appointed administrator, and it will not end until we have secured the throne room. I long to see the look on young Adam's face as we turn his world into a labor camp, and he's appointed as my personal slave. As the earth's sun rises over the Garden of Eden, we will rise to our rightful position of authority. We shall establish our internal stronghold on the earth, and from there we will launch our ultimate attack. The time has come. The earth is ours, and heaven awaits our liberation. We, my friend, shall soon be gods, and there is nothing that can prevent us from fulfilling our destinies. Longing to see you in Eden, Lucifer. As I read Lucifer's words, my blood ran cold. I just stood there for a moment in hushed silence, realizing that my worst fear had come true. All the words of repentance that my old friend had spoken were nothing more than a lie, and now it seemed as if his evil plans were coming to a head. I had never dreamed that his ambition could drive him to such measures, but now there was no doubt. He had to be stopped, and the time to act was at hand. I knew that I could never do it on my own, so I immediately enlisted the help of my trusted friend, Gabriel. As I entered Gabriel's home, he instantly noticed the look of concern that was on my face. "What's troubling you, old friend?" Gabriel asked. "Perhaps it would be better if you read it for yourself, Gabriel." As I handed Gabriel the letter, he noticed it had been addressed to Baal. "Whatever possessed you to open this letter, Michael? It's not addressed to you." "Forget about my reasoning, Gabriel. Look at what it says." As Gabriel's attention was diverted away from me, my mind suddenly shifted to the events that I knew laid ahead. I began seeing the repercussions of Lucifer's actions unfolding before my eyes. It was as though I had been transported through time, beyond the cloaked espionage of the moment, to stand at the frontier of confrontation. I experienced the horror of wielding a sword against those that I've always loved. I heard the voices of friends as they cried out in agony over the decisions that they had made. Then I saw the face of the God that I served. He was not his normal jovial self. His smiling face and loving demeanor had been replaced with a stern expression of judgment. Yet despite his exterior look of confidence, I knew that his heart was breaking. I would give anything to be able to divert those tragedies, but what could I possibly do? Even with Gabriel by my side, what could we do to stop the inevitable, especially once the events had already progressed so far? Then I remembered my conversation with the Lord. He had assured me that he had already made provision, so I could not help but wonder if I wasn't the provision that he spoke of. This would explain why God had allowed Lucifer to maintain his position of authority. God knew that with me serving under Lucifer, that I would intercept this communication, thereby enabling the defenders of heaven to be in position and ready for anything that the Luciferians could dish out. With this knowledge came a renewed strength and vigor. For the first time since this entire mess began, I felt as though I had a purpose, and there was nothing going to prevent me from fulfilling it. In anticipation, I placed my hand on my sword, almost as if I was confirming its location. Never before had the possession of a weapon felt so crucial, for sadly it seemed as if our swords would soon be playing a vital role in protecting the kingdom. I knew the assembly had to be alerted, but which angels could we trust? We'd have to be very careful about who we approached with this information. The element of surprise was on our side, and I didn't want to lose the advantage. As Gabriel looked up from the letter, I saw that shocked, almost numb expression on his face. I could tell that he was trying not to believe it, but there it was right in front of him. Lucifer could never offer an adequate excuse for such blasphemy, and Gabriel knew it. Lucifer had moved from the arena of petty jealousy and discontentment to out-and-out rebellion, and neither of us wanted to face what we knew was coming next. In order to interrupt the awkwardness of the moment, I reached toward Gabriel and took the letter from his hand. I have to get this thing delivered before they realize that we are onto them. While I'm gone, I want you to make contact with only the most loyal of the assembly commanders. Inform them of the information that we have obtained and ask them to gather their most faithful angels together and meet us on the outskirts of Eden prior to the rising of the earth's sun. We will be there waiting on you, Michael. May God watch over us as we stand against those that threaten the security of the kingdom. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. I dreaded seeing Baal again, especially in light of the information that I now knew. What if I was unable to contain my emotions, or what if I said the wrong thing and somehow tipped them off that their plans had been discovered? As I knocked on Baal's front door, I literally felt my stomach churn. The very thought of being in his presence again was making me sick, but I knew that this encounter was unavoidable. Took you so long, Archangel? Lucifer's already been here, and may I also add that he was not pleased with your delay. My whereabouts are my business, Baal. Do you want this package or not? Why don't you file it for me? Just log it in under Michael Blewett again. I'm not going to stand here and listen to your sarcasm any longer. You need to remember that despite your friendship with my supervisor, you are still my subordinate. What are you going to do to enforce your authority over me, Michael? See, that's the problem with the way things are with this current system. When the respect is gone, so is the authority, and I assure you I have no respect for you at all. I think that our meeting has reached its conclusion. If you'd like to reply to Lucifer's letter, may I suggest that you do so yourself, because I'm not interested in hearing anything that you have to say. I tossed Lucifer's letter to the floor and left Baal's home as quickly as I could. It appeared that they had no idea that their plans had been discovered. So with the issue now settled, I knew that it was time for me to meet with Gabriel and the others. We could prepare our defense of Eden. Upon my arrival, my heart began to leap inside of my chest. Surrounding the outskirts of Eden was a gathering of angelic forces unlike any that I had seen since the Great Celebration. Those that were loyal to my Lord stretched as far as the eye could see. As striking as the sheer numbers that were joined together was the silence that permeated the atmosphere. There was none of the small talk or nervous laughter that you would suspect would dominate such a gathering. It was as though everyone was feeling the heaviness of what we were about to face. And though they were willing to do whatever it took to end all of this foolishness, we were still not looking forward to it. It was as though the entire assembly was in the same state of shock that Gabriel and I felt when we first read Lucifer's letter and came to the realization of what was about to happen. As soon as my feet touched the ground, Gabriel came running to me. Well, I believe that we have enough support to repel any attack that the enemy could possibly hope to launch. Wouldn't you agree? God told me that he'd already made provision, and now as I look around here, I see that his provision is one of abundance. As I stood in the midst of my friends and allies, I knew that this was a trying time for all of us, and though I felt the need to offer words of encouragement, I didn't know what to say. The situation that we were in was grave. Mere words could not change that. Yet I also knew that every eye was on me, and I could feel their inner longing for some type of confirmation that what we were doing was the right thing. As I stood there trying to think, I looked up to the skies over Eden and realized our time was growing short. So I finally took up an elevated position before my brethren and asked for their attention. I know that this is beyond anything that any of us has ever had to face in the past, and I thank you not only for your loyalty and commitment to the kingdom, but more importantly to God. We have joined together in the valley of confrontation, not only in the defense of Eden, but also to try and lead our brethren to repentance. It is my prayer that when we repel the enemy's assault, then they will recognize the futility of their efforts, thereby causing them to relinquish their foolish desires and come back to where they belong. Today we shall fight, but it is not only for our God and our kingdom, but also for the salvation of our brothers that now believe that they are our enemies. The entire congregation was electrified with excitement. They responded with a mighty shout in unison, proclaiming, "We fight for our God, our kingdom, and our brothers." Once the shouting subsided, we each embraced and then took positions hidden within the terrain of Eden, waiting for our enemy's arrival. From a skyward vantage point, Eden looked as normal as ever. It even seemed that our presence had gone unnoticed by Earth's regular population. So when Lucifer's advance patrol hit Eden, they seemed to have had no idea that we were there until it was too late. The battle was intense. There were swords flashing in every direction. The sparks that were generated by these striking swords lit up the fields like a conglomeration of small stars. The heat that was being generated by the battle made it feel as though we were standing in the middle of a furnace. And despite the fact that we outnumbered our adversaries by 20 to 1, it still took a long time to corral them. They fought with a rage and fury that seemed to intensify their strength, while we fought with more reservation, hoping that our brothers would see the error of their ways. At the conclusion of the battle, I was surprised at how few Luciferians showed up for the fight. Perhaps Lucifer had overestimated his support, but what really bothered me was the fact that the only ranking official that was there was Baal. It just didn't make any sense. Where was Lucifer? Not to mention his many advisors. I figured the best place to obtain answers to these questions would be from the recently defeated commander of our adversaries. So Gabriel and I immediately went to interview our now defeated foe. "Well, Baal, I hope your defeat has taught you some respect. Not for the likes of you, Michael. Besides, what you call a defeat, we call a schedule. We were but pawns whose only purpose was to keep you and your army of fools busy while our primary forces secured the throne room. So while you celebrate your meaningless victory, Lucifer secures dominion over your homeland. Gabriel and I just stood there trembling. If what Baal had just said was true, then Lucifer had manipulated me into leading the armies of heaven on a wild goose chase. Why had I not trusted in God fully? He had already told me that he'd taken care of everything, so I knew better than to read Lucifer's letter. Now, sadly, I knew that if I hadn't read it, then we, the allies of God, would never have left our given assignments. I couldn't shake the knowledge that by following my own desires instead of God's leading, I caused the throne room to go virtually unguarded. Inside, I hoped that Baal was bluffing, but something told me he wasn't. So I immediately set out toward heaven. Michael, Gabriel called out behind me, I will rally our forces and we shall be there as quickly as we can. As I approached heaven, the sound of war was everywhere. Clashing swords were making a noise that was almost deafening. No sooner had my feet hit the ground than I was set upon by a swarming mob of Lucifer's troops. I was in a totally defensive position, lashing out at anything that moved, just hoping and praying that somehow the members of the host that I had led astray would arrive back in time to reinforce our lines. Suddenly I saw the Imperial Guard begin to buckle. I wanted to do something to help them. But now is not the time to be thinking of tactics or strategies. Now is the time to just try and survive. I'd hoped that we could somehow hold our enemies at bay, at least until our primary forces arrived. But with one sudden thrust, I saw our lines break. The sound of Gabriel's trumpet could be heard in the distance, but they were still so far away that our defeat seemed imminent. But then there was a surge of power that filled the air, and then the unimaginable happened. Lucifer's hordes simply stopped fighting and began crumpling up and falling to the ground. They were in such intense pain that their objective was now the furthest thing from their minds. The sound of striking swords had been replaced by the sound of weapons being dropped to the ground. What only moments before seemed to be a triumphant army had been replaced by a cowering mass of timid children. The fighting had stopped, and our enemies found themselves writhing in the dirt and crying out in agony. It was then that I looked up at the entranceway of the throne room and noticed the Lord himself. As I looked at the cowering enemy that lay upon the ground, I remembered the day that I stood in the presence of God with sin in my heart, and I knew what these rebels were feeling. Gabriel and the host of heaven finally swooped in and surrounded their defeated foes. What happened, Michael? Sin is unable to stand in the presence of God, Gabriel. Lucifer and his minions have always known a merciful and loving God, but now for the first time they found themselves looking into the presence of a holy and righteous God. It was then that I came to the realization that God does not need our protection. He only desires our fellowship. I began to condemn myself for my prior ignorance until God looked at me and with a wink said, I've told you before, Michael, my grace is sufficient for you. God then stripped Lucifer and his followers of their glory and immediately ejected them from the heavenly realm. How I wish that I could tell you that this was the end of our problems with these rebels, but heaven was but the first of God's creation to be tempted by and then purged of iniquity. The host had passed their test, thereby never having to undergo temptation again. But there is another world. The world that I speak of is the earth. And sadly, I have noticed that the forces of darkness have taken a special interest in it as of late. I have seen them hovering around it and watching its population. I know that they are just waiting for the proper time to bring their trap. Adam and his race shall soon be tested, and I pray that they will pass their test, for I have seen the alternative that awaits those who fail.